Roll for today. Getting the show ready. All right, are we live yet? Okay, cool. It looks like we are live. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm Jamar Dawson, and this is episode number 8 of the Off My Chest Facebook live show. I'm probably gonna also port this over to YouTube or whatnot, at least special episodes like today. But man, we got a jam-packed episode. We're talking about the controversial Georgia voting law. I am super excited to talk about this today, mostly because everybody's talking about it. Man, there has been boycotts and threats to boycott on both sides. People are saying if people are upset, then you boycott their product, or if you're a supporter of us, then you get out of there and you abstain from this. It is really wild and crazy. And so I said, hey, let's devote an episode strictly to this. Typically what we want to talk about here is a local issue, local here to Mississippi. We talk about a national issue, and then we do a shout out at the end. But today we're pivoting just a little bit and focusing primarily on this. And so we're going to dive into it. We're going to talk about what's in the bill, because what a lot of these politicians are talking about, what a lot of these media members are talking about, aren't actually things that pertain to what's specifically in the bill. They're either miscommunicating it for their own gain and their own reasons, or what they're doing is only talking about certain things, which I want to expose all of it. Now, we're not going to go into every single line by line, and I could guarantee you I probably read more of this particular bill than most politicians, which is sad, and most people in the media that are trying to get people's opinions swayed one way or the other, which is sad. But what we want to do is just be informed and talk through some things. So I wanted to talk about that today. Hope you guys enjoy it. And without further ado, but first, as we always do, I want to start off with a quick scripture that has encouraged me. This comes from, let's see, where is my scripture at? Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. It says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." I love this scripture mostly because it's an encouragement to those who have been grinding. It's kind of like the seed when it's put into the soil. When you put a seed into soil, the next day you're not going to see growth, but growth is taking place, right? It may be below the surface. It may be outside of the view of everybody else. When God grows you and does things in your life, he doesn't necessarily do it in public. Sometimes he does it on the backside of a mountain, right? And so just because you're putting work in, maybe you're dedicated to something, trying to accomplish something that you feel is part of your purpose, just because you're not seeing immediate results, don't get weary of it. And so that's why I love that verse there, and I've been encouraged by it, and hopefully you can be encouraged by it as well. So without any further ado, let's jump into this Georgia voting law. And if you guys have any comments, please feel free to join the conversation. I'm really looking forward to diving into this. And so the interesting thing about this law, as I mentioned briefly before, is very controversial. People from all over the country have been weighing in on this and putting their own spin on it. But I wanted to dive deep and really discuss from a nonpartisan perspective, from an objective and logical perspective, what is in this, what's good about it, what's not so good about it. Because I think a lot of these bills that are put forth, whether it's written by Republican or Democrat, there are some things that are good. If you're just an objective person, independently minded, there's a couple of things that are good. There's a couple of things that are pretty crappy. And okay, why would I change what I would change? I'm going to give that too at the very end. So let's go ahead and dive into specifically the bill and some highlights of it. So hopefully you guys could see on the screen. Hopefully that's zoomed in enough. I'm going to go through the sections and kind of just scroll down to a section that kind of piques my interest that I want to talk to. The first several sections, some of them are kind of just introductory paragraphs. They're not a whole lot of detail in what's involved and what they're changing as far as the call out and mandate and requirements. So either that or the things that are not really relevant to our discussion today. So I want to go straight to Section 4. Okay, cool. So this amends a previous existing code as it relates to legislature that gives the Attorney General authority to establish a hotline for voters to call and file complaints about illegal election activities that they may notice. I don't have a big problem with that. I actually think that's pretty good. Having a hotline, and there's times established in this particular hotline here where somebody needs to get back to somebody and investigate stuff. I think having a vehicle to the people and the voters to be able to, like, hey, Abraham Lincoln's name is on this voter log, and it's getting sent out all over the place. I don't think that he's a voter here. Or, man, I see some people some people photocopying some ballots, or whatever it may be. You could call in this hotline and say, hey, this is what I'm noticing. So I think that's good. I think that's pretty good. All right, let's move on. Not a whole lot to beat the horse on that one. So let's scroll down. Some of these other things are just kind of regulatory, amending things to make the sections more clear. Like I said, we're not going to touch on every single thing, but I have gone through this pretty thoroughly. And I recommend any big bills that come out, any big laws, I recommend you go out for yourself and investigate and see what's going on. All right, so section number 9. This is another interesting section. This essentially blocks the election superintendents and governing officials and authorities from accepting money and funding or gifts outside of the government. So non-government sources can no longer give money to those who are part of the election officials in certain precincts and stuff like that. I think that's good. I think that's relatively nonpartisan. I think most people will be cool with that. But I like that is spelled out. It will eliminate fraud. Really, it will eliminate bribes. Really, that's the word I'm looking for. So I like that section. I don't think there's any controversy there. I think that that's good that they included that. Section 9, not a whole lot there. I'm sorry, Section 10. Section 11, it talks about student teen election participants and kind of gives more detailed. I think it's good getting younger folks involved with the process and helping them understand and get them excited about politics. That's good. Section 12 is also a pretty good section here. This allows for performance reviews for election officials, and it mandates that they are conducted by the state election board, and they are going to investigate for technical competency, following election processes and procedures, and regulatory compliance. So I think this is pretty good. They could also appoint an independent performance review board to investigate further if they need to. So basically there's timelines and other things established here, and if there is a review that needs to take place because of bad behavior or people who aren't maintaining the voting equipment, whatever it may be, independent review boards can be formed and investigate these instances. And while it probably won't impact an election that would just happen, it would impact future elections by either reprimanding people or removing them. So I think that this is a pretty good section. I don't think this is very controversial. Section 12, pretty good. I think it probably would have bipartisan support if it was presented to the people. Let's move to an area where I don't necessarily agree fully on, and that's Section 13. So essentially here, it says if somebody dies, a candidate dies prior to an election, let's not remove their name from the actual ballot. Let's keep them on there. Because, if it may be a day or 2 days or 3 days before, it'd probably be a lot of confusion and cost a lot of money to remove a dead person's name from a ballot. I get that. But what I don't have a problem with is they keep them on the ballot and they count the votes. And if they win, they don't just give the second place person the office. They basically call it kind of like a no contest. Basically, they interpret it as if there was a failure to fill that seat or to fill that office position. And that would be most likely result in a special election. I'm not a big fan of special elections. I'm not a big fan of adding them kind of nonsensically, right? And so we've seen that all around the country. There's always special elections. I feel like Mississippi, we had like 4 in the 2020 election. After the general election, there was like 2 or 3 other ones for a couple different positions. And that just, really exhausts people. And I'd rather just be one day, people handle it and be done. And for something like this, if someone dies, that's unfortunate. Cool, count the votes for them. But if they end up winning, I don't think that they should just say basically there was a failure to fill the seat. Let's have a special election again. They could probably do something better. So I'm not extremely grieved by that section, but that's not something that I like a whole lot. Section 14, this blocks the Board of Registrars who deal with determining annual budgets and other things from taking outside funding and gifts from non-governmental sources. Very similar to a previous section. I think that's great. Any type of preventing a bribe or anything like that is better. The more of that, the merrier for me. So that's a pretty good section. Up to this point, there's not a lot of controversy, as you can see. Let's move to section 15. This is an interesting one. Basically says an elector of a county or municipality can challenge the qualifications of any person or persons whose name appears on the list of electors. There's no limit to how many people this person can challenge in regards to this. And basically, you get about 10 days to challenge and have your challenge processed by the government. Then the person who is being challenged is given like a minimum of 3 days to prepare for a summons. Then there's a bunch of legal rigmarole that goes in. It goes to the courts. There's subpoenas and all other stuff. I don't like this simply because I believe it opens the door for abuse. Republicans and Democrats. Now, if somebody notices on a voter roll that, let's use Abraham Lincoln's name again, Honest Abe is on there. Okay, hey, maybe this guy isn't actually supposed to be on the voter roll. That's cool. But I could see it being abused by saying, yeah, these 10,000 people, they are not supposed to be in the voter roll, and have all this evidence, and then it gets accepted by the courts, and it ties the courts up. In a time where it takes so long for lawsuits and other things to go in anyways, I don't believe we should be weighing the courts down. We already, in one of the previous sections, section 4, I believe, we already established a hotline for fraudulent activities. Let's throw in any types of challenges and questions into that hotline instead of having this section devoted to lawsuits and tying up the courts. And so I'll talk about this later and what I believe can be done to kind of modernize the voter roll anyways in its entirety. But yeah, so that's one of the main reasons I don't like this. If you could completely prevent the abuse by modernizing the voter roll, still have a way for the voters to connect with the government saying, hey, Smokey the Bear shouldn't be on here, but at the same time, that should also be part of a checks and balance process from a nonpartisan independent group. So it is what it is. But I do not like Section 15. I believe it's probably going to be abused and try to be used to eliminate mass number of people. A lot of folks aren't talking about that. They're talking about all these other things, but this is the one, that particular section, Section 15, if someone's going to abuse something, it's probably going to be that section. All right, let's move on. I don't want to take too much of y'all's time. I want to really hit some more of the heavy hitters, so I might bypass a couple of these things. Let's just move to Section 20. I have a little beef with this particular section. So this talks essentially about banning of buses in mobile voting facilities unless there's an emergency declared by the governor. Now, because of COVID, there was a lot more mobile voting stations. Voting stations that were mobile were helpful because polling places traditionally get clogged up, particularly in areas where there's not enough space for enough people to egress and ingress safely and quickly. I mean, I was in line myself for like 2.5 hours in a county in Mississippi, and I know people were in line for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. So these mobile voting stations were really used to help alleviate some of the pain points. While at this, and that's all well and good, but at the same time, they are really, right now, they're eliminating them in their entirety. I'm not a big fan of them because I feel like you could probably do other things to allow voting to be easier for the person other than a mobile station. But eliminating them in their entirety, a lot of people have a lot of problems with that. I'm going to talk about my solution for that a little bit later, but that is one of the key points where people have a lot of grief and a lot of grievances. So I'll discuss that in my voting plan a little bit later in this show. But Section 20, they're basically saying unless there's a unless there's a statewide emergency declared by the governor, no more mobile voting stations. And if you have a situation in 2022 or 2024 where people are trying to come vote and it's 6 and 7 hours long, by putting these mobile stations, if that decreases the wait times so people can go there instead, I think that is a an answer, I don't think it is a long-term solution. So I'm not really pleased with this unless they really had a good solution to pair this with to expand and open opportunities for voting to go forth without as much line waiting. So that's what it is, in my opinion, for that particular segment there. Okay, let's move on down. Section number 23. Okay, are we approaching the halfway point? Maybe, kind of, sort of. Yeah, definitely the halfway point of what I want to talk about. This is about printing ballots on security paper for help with authentication. Big fan of that. I don't have any problems with that. I don't think many people have a bunch of problems with that. Anything that make things secure, I'm for. I used to work for an IT security company, so I've always been real security minded. I'm doing a lot of IT projects now, my current firm, that helps with the advancement of security. Everybody's talking about security for every corporate entity. We need to just do a little bit more to be secure. If we could do just a slight thing to change the security and up it up to one level, then hey, that's good enough for me. So printing on secure paper, I don't have a problem with. Section 25, this is an interesting one here. There's a lot of beef. This is where a lot of people are struggling and upset and bringing the fire and fury. So it basically outlines rules for vote by mail and absentee ballots. It really requires your driver's license or an ID card number when you're filling out your paper ballot. If you don't have one of these, and people don't talk about this, people who are opponents of this section, the government gives you, through this law, an out. If you don't have an ID card or a driver's license number, there's other forms that you could utilize, but you have to attach it, and there's a space they're going to give you to attach it on your ballot. People are mad because they're saying, oh, that's not fair, that's racist, some people don't have ID cards. I'll get to that later. Trust me, it's going to be a fire and fury rant, but I don't think people should be as hung up on this as they are, because there is the out for you to be able to supply something that's not just your driver's license. So it is what it is, but that's where people are right now. Another component about this is that it bans anybody requesting a ballot for somebody other than a relative of that person, and only the person or a relative can drop that ballot off once you are done completing it. Some people don't like this because it effectively bans voting harvesting, basically going into neighborhoods and getting people to fill out ballots and then taking them back in and dropping them off. It bans people from doing, and I understand the spirit of this. I can get why some folks are upset. I would have liked a provision for if someone needs help, then the government entity comes in and helps them fill it out, or some other types of way. That would probably eliminate a lot of confusion and a lot of issues and a lot of security concerns. But I can see why people are mad. A lot of folks went into different communities, said, here are these ballots, fill them out, and we'll take them out and drop them off for you. And I can understand if that option is taken away, then people are like, well, that's not fair. What it comes down to, though, we just need to make things easier. I'm not saying we should just walk up and down the street with ballots. And I'm not saying that and saying, hey, fill this out, because that could be intimidation. I don't think anybody who's not related to the government should be able to do that. I'm all for opening up opportunities to vote, but it has to be sanctioned and monitored by the government. A Democrat would not want Republicans going up and down people's streets with ballots, just like a Republican wouldn't want a Democrat going up in people's streets with ballots and then dropping them off. It needs to be a government-sanctioned entity in order for that, from my opinion, to work. And I could talk about that a little bit later. But that's one of the big hang-up sections, is Section 25, because it really does mandate an ID, which people are pissed off about, especially for not a provisional, but for a mail-in or absentee ballot. It's mandating that you have an ID or a driver's license or other form that's basically an electronically scanned onto your ballot or attached to your ballot, and you're verified that way. I'm all for verification. I mean, you guys know that by now. But it does ban the harvesting of ballots, and that's probably the part that most people are upset about. And I get it. It is what it is. Now, Section 26 is another interesting section. As you can see, Section 25 was pretty exhaustive. Section 26 is a pretty interesting one. Very, 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 very controversial. So basically, it says that there could only be one drop box per 100,000 registered active voters in a county. Opponents of this particular section say it limits people's options for dropping off ballots and thus is unjust and unfair. According to some estimates, the number of ballots that you could drop off, the number of drop boxes available will go from 94 in 2020 to about 23 drop boxes in 2022. And so that's quite a drop. And a lot of people are saying this isn't fair because I can't get to a voting station and these voting boxes are set up for particular reasons and they have certain hours. They're easier for me to get to and travel to these voter boxes and drop my ballot off that way than going to somewhere and wait in line, or et cetera, et cetera. So I can see why it's controversial. And then eliminating the number of boxes by a huge percentage, more than 50%, that is pretty extreme in of itself as well. I think the reason why they're limiting them is because they want every single drop box location to be monitored. And there's, a lot of rules about collecting the things from the drop boxes, the ballots from the drop boxes, et cetera, who can do it, how many people need to do it, what they need to do once they get to there and once they drop the ballots off. So I think they're trying to save money. I don't have a huge problem with the drop boxes. I think that there's other ways to deliver your vote than a drop box. If you could mail your ballot in, I think that will probably be better than using a drop box. But some people like to have a drop box to where they could put something in and know that they actually deposited. But the problem is these need to be monitored. And so that, there can't be somebody taking ballots out or tampering with the box or whatever. So I think that's probably why they limited it. But there's probably some other things of, hey, let's decrease the number. I think that without a doubt, people need to know where their drop box is and how to deliver a ballot if they're not doing it by mail. And so this is a super controversial section because the ballot boxes, drop-off boxes are decreasing. Take what you will. I'm not a big fan of the section overall because I think that there's other solutions. I'll get with that in just a few moments after we finish this list. We're not going to go much farther, just a few more. So section 27, it shortens the mandatory dates in which absentee ballots can be mailed in before an election. Section 28, this one isn't probably getting talked about as much. Let's get just straight down to it. Let me roll down. Okay, section 28. This essentially expands early voting to include multiple Saturdays and the option for 2 Sundays, okay? And it's not just normal business hours that it was open for. Now it's from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with that option, in addition to the weekdays. So a lot of folks are saying this is a very restrictive law. Well, you have to look at everything. Look at everything. I guarantee you a lot of these folks telling you whether this is a good law or a bad law probably haven't read it in detail like we're going through it today. But Section 28 is one that just about anybody could probably agree with. It expands voting. It gives people more opportunities and expands the time. Some people are upset because they're saying, well, now it's expanded to 2 Sundays. Well, I can't go and vote on a Sunday because I'm usually using that for church or worship or whatever. Well, you have all these other opportunities to vote. So I'm not really in opposition to this. Like I said, they expanded the times. And instead of being from 8 to 5, it's now 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. as far as options go. And 2 Saturdays and with an option for 2 Sundays. I think that helps to expand voting. And in some media networks that are trying to be relatively objective have done a decent job in covering that. But, I think that advanced voting options for people voting with expanded hours allows folks not less excuses, but less opportunity to not fall within that window, especially having Saturday and Sunday voting open. So it spans early voting and includes Saturdays and Sundays. I think that's a pretty good inclusion, regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever. Having that option, I don't think is a bad thing. And that's an actual polling location. So that's pretty good. Just a few more. I don't know what to think of Section 32. Actually, no, I do know what to think. I don't like Section 32. So Section 32 mandates training for poll watchers. I don't like this because it specifically says by political candidates, the training needs to be done by political candidates, political parties, something, of those nature. I don't like that because I think a poll watcher should be nonpartisan. You probably get the theme for a lot of my shows. For a lot of things, there's just right and then there's wrong, right? If you're going to have somebody making sure that things are being done correctly, there should be independent eyes on them. And I understand why they're not explicitly stating independence because it's hard to find that when you're voting, but you should have people who aren't trained by political parties and campaigns. You should have people trained by a standardized system that the government puts out. That way, you could at least say, this is the standard, this is what everybody is doing, and this person is certified to be a watcher, okay? And if that person, whether they're looking at Republican or Democrat votes, if they do something and they miss something, then they need to be held accountable for that, especially if they're doing that intentionally. So I don't like the fact that they leave it up to the political parties and the campaign teams to train people. It should be a standardized training. All right, Section 33, very, very controversial, okay? This is extremely controversial. It is being blown out of proportion in some respects to some people. I think that this is probably getting more coverage than most people might deem necessary. I think that it's getting maybe just a little more coverage than it probably should, but let's talk about it. So it essentially bans political campaigns and other groups from giving out food, giving out drinks in line, or giving out gifts or other types of things to people who are waiting to vote, right? Now, I'm cool with the fact that it allows for election officials to provide these things if they want to. That's fine. Like I said, nonpartisan, the government, if people are going to be stopping something, you have to ask, okay, so if something's going to be stopped by people, is the government going to fill in? What is the solution going to be on the back end? I was waiting for 2.5 hours to vote here in Mississippi. I know people were waiting in much longer lines. If people are not going to be able to get refreshments by anybody, that's a problem. Well, I like the fact that they opened the door at least for the government officials to be able to provide some, but it says nobody can give anybody else can give anything else. You can't solicit signatures for petitions. I kind of like that. You can't give out food, gifts, all that kind of stuff to people in line if you're part of a campaign. Now, if you just think about that, if there was no partisan play whatsoever, if somebody told you this and you were part of a particular political affiliation, and the person from your political affiliation said, yeah, we're going to ban the other side from being able to give refreshments, you'd probably be okay with it. This is all about thinking objectively. What would I feel if I was on the opposite side? Now, if somebody is giving drinks and they have let's just say I was running for office and I was running against Joe Smo. And Joe Schmo's folks with their campaign gear was walking out, handing out water and bottles in line. I wouldn't like that. You wouldn't like that, right? So I can understand the spirit of where this is coming from. However, people are really bent out of shape saying, well, in these long lines, if you're denying people to get food, some people are going to just walk away. Now, there were some folks that ended up getting out of line. I don't really recall more than 2 or 3 people getting out of those long lines here, but probably in 6, 7, 8 hour lines, people probably got out of them. And without any type of refreshment, I could see that. So I think that, this is controversial. I see why. I'm 100% down with banning certain types of campaigning and other things outside of polling places from a certain distance from the polling place. That's already in effect everywhere. But I do think people are getting hung up with the fact that you cannot do this thing. Now, it's only 150 feet now, okay? So 150 feet back, if you're farther back in line from 150 feet, then it's okay to give water and all these other things, right? And you could talk to these folks and you can interact with them. This law isn't preventing that. But, overall, I think that, once again, if you're going to take something away, you should supplement it with something else, another option for people, especially if you have long lines. So I don't really like all this stuff in here. I think they could have said it in a different way. But what it comes down to, we can make voting and the experience easier and better anyway. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Sorry about that. That notice, iTunes notice. So that's section 33. The last one I wanted to cover today was section 34. And so this basically directs people to the correct voting precinct if they arrive at the wrong one. Here in Mississippi, I've been told you could vote just about anywhere. It doesn't matter the precincts. And I haven't really tried that out, but I have voted at multiple places over the last 7+ years that I've been here. And I wasn't always at the correct precinct, but I've been able to vote. In this particular law, it bans folks from voting at the wrong precinct, but it says, look, you have to go to this one. It kind of directs people to the right precinct. You can't vote here, but I'll show you where you can go. And the reason why some people don't like this particular measure is because in the 2020 election, folks were told last minute, once they got through their 5-hour line, oh, you're at the wrong place, you got to go here. And by then, they're like, I'm too tired to go to the next place and vote. Or, oh, by then, I'm going to be late and it's going to close by the time I get in line. So I can understand the spirit of both sides here, but it comes down to making things easier. Now, for this particular section, I have a complete comprehensive solution, but I can see why people are not happy in some respects, because it is kind of boxing folks out if you're going to the wrong precinct, and it's limiting your ability to cast a vote in the wrong precinct. So, I know that there's going to be some beef there, but I think that we need to have a better solution than what's offered. So this kind of falls short. So I can see a valid point on both sides. Now, one thing that I did want to show is that all states have very different voting laws. And let me show you exactly what I mean by that. Okay, so as you can see here, this website is the usvotefoundation.org. I think it does a pretty good job. Let me move this over slightly. Hopefully you guys could see this well. Okay, so as you can see here, all these different states have different voting methods and options. Alabama doesn't have same-day voter registration. It doesn't have absentee voting without an excuse. It doesn't even have early voting. But you do have in-person absentee voting. Very interesting compared with a place like California, where basically all of their lines are checked, where you have, obviously polling place voting, same day voter registration. That's a little controversial to me. You can vote absentee without an excuse. You could vote early. You could do just about everything in California for a variety of reasons. And if you look at this, you could just see that there's a long laundry list. So it's just clear that in multiple states, there's different things, right? This grid is all over the place for all the states. Okay, Jamar, what is it that you would have as a solution? All right, let me dig into this here. Let me get back to here. There's a couple of things that I would do. Now, to start out, I want to say this as clearly and as plainly as I can. Errors, mistakes, fraud, it happens all the time on a local level and on a national level. Okay, people saying, these news networks saying there's absolutely zero fraud, they are liars, because it happens on the local level when there's only precincts with 100 people voting. It happens on the federal level. It happens all the time. Republicans do it, Democrats do it, and we've been doing it for decades, for centuries really. But we've been doing it for so long here in the country. So don't allow anybody to say there's no voter fraud or there's no mistake. There's errors, there's mistakes, and there's always people trying to cheat the system, Republican, Democrat, and others who just want the world to burn, right? You got some folks who have nefarious means and all that kind of stuff, and they just want to upset the apple cart. There are people working behind the scenes to disrupt things. So my desire is to minimize it. I could care less who wins, okay? I've voted since I've been eligible to vote in 2004. I could care less who wins. But as it comes down to a solution, I wanted to first say errors, mistakes, fraudulent activity, suspicious activity. We need to do something to identify these means and prevent them. So I just wanted to say that first. I wanted to clarify that. That is not a partisan thing. That is clearly a common sense thing, right? Because in 2016, the Democrats were saying, oh, we believe that there's been fraudulent behavior and Trump stole the election. In 2020, the Republicans were saying, we believe there's fraudulent behavior. In a way, I get it. I understand. But a way to move forward and start with the solution is to at least say, I think we agree errors, mistakes, and fraud is not something that anybody wants. Now, some people do because it benefits them. But from an objective standpoint, we got to start there. So I wanted to put that out there. But number one, I believe we need to make it easier for people to vote. We need to make it easier. Some people are afraid that the more people that vote, the less likely their candidate's going to win. I think that is an organizational problem. I think that's a problem that that person or that group has with outreach, especially on a local level. I believe in order to make it easier, really we need to look at all options, okay? And I may be on a particular side of the fence here. We need to look at all options that may include a federal holiday for voting. We've talked about in California, there's early voting. There's not early voting in Alabama, American Samoa, Connecticut, Delaware, Guam, Indiana, Iowa, Maine, at least as of the publication of this, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, at least on normal election years. New Hampshire. There's a lot of places don't allow for early voting. So there's opportunities here to make it easier for people to vote, okay? So if it's not a federal holiday, at least maybe early voting. Maybe we could look at using some technology. I know people don't like that. I've talked to many people who don't like that. But utilizing technology to cast votes. I'm not saying you should be able to go on Twitter and cast your vote. I'm not saying that. But I do believe in multi-factor authentication. When I went to go take my PNP exam, they take that very, very seriously. I decided to take it in person, but because of the pandemic, they offered an option to take it on your own computer, right? But in order to take it, you had to have a picture of your driver's license. You had to hold it up to the screen. You had to take a snapshot of that. You had to have a camera on at all times with a speaker. If you spoke too loud, they interpreted you speaking to somebody in the room and then providing you answers. They'll tell you to shut up or they void your test. You had to take pictures all around your workstation and prove that you don't have pieces of paper hanging up and all sorts of stuff. It was a pain. But a lot of people did it that way. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people got their PNP certification. So I believe through that and other ways, because there's multi-factor authentication, most people are using that anyway. And I'm going to talk about that in my next point. But using technology to vote can open up access for people. I don't want to hear anything about, well, some people can't vote. We just got through with a pandemic. We're still kind of in it. Where we had old folks using Zoom for the first time to watch church services, people ordering groceries from their cell phone. People now are at a point where they're comfortable with utilizing technology. And think about it, hundreds of thousands of dollars by certain folks is traded online and stored in bank accounts and traded and transferred without a thought. That's without a second thought at all. Bitcoin, stock market, we've gotten to the point where we are trusting. If those financial institutions have built up that trust, we need the same thing in our elections. So I don't have a problem using technology if there's verification and other types of means. So we need to make it easier for people to vote. So that's the first point. Second point, we need to eliminate the possibility for mistakes, error, and fraud. I mentioned that already. It happens everywhere. I don't care if I'm running for office and I beat the brakes off of somebody. If there was some error and there was some fraud, and if the right methodology of counting would have resulted in me losing, I'm okay with that. I would be devastated, and I'm extremely against any form of cheating. So now maybe that's just me. I know different political parties may think otherwise, but we need to eliminate any, even just mistakes that nobody intended to make. We need to do that. So like I mentioned in the last point, people are now using their phones to do things, using computers to do things that they've never done before. I think we could look at multi-factor authentication as part of eliminating mistakes and errors and any other types of things. I don't have a problem with an ID. I remember when the the liberals in North Carolina came to the college students, the black ones in particular, in 2006, 2007, and they're like, you know, there's these laws that the white Republicans are making, and it's preventing you guys from being able to vote. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, some black folks can't afford an ID, and so, you know, they just can't vote now because the Republicans want this voter ID law. And I'm like, well, I got an ID. I don't know anybody without an ID. And I dug a little bit deeper into it, and the Republicans were saying, look, we don't have a problem with even paying for it. The state can pay for it. We just want somebody to have a verification, right? So whether the state pays for it or you utilize something outside of your ID or driver's license to validate who you are, there has to be something. Even if it's just a thumbprint or something, we have to do something to validate that people are who they say we are, right? We do it in everything else. I mean, you guys, I went and got a new phone at Verizon. I'm still using my own one, right? But if you go to Verizon and you're in store and you're trying to log into your account there with the representative to get a new phone, they send you a multi-factor authentication code to your phone to verify that's you, and you're standing right there. And you give them the number and everything. And you have to authenticate and allow them to access your account, even if it's in person, for everything. Logging on to your banks, people have that. Logging on to any type of finance, there's multi-factor authentication and two-step verification. I don't have a big problem with that, guys. I don't think that that's an issue. It's not a racist issue anymore. That can't be used as an excuse. In certain places, like California and those other places where you don't have to show voter ID, it just opens the door for, even if it's not fraud, but for mistakes. A person can go to the wrong voting precinct and realize it later and just say someone else's name or get added to the roll there. It just opens up the room for mistakes. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not even a big person knocking the door down about fraud about this, but what's wrong with identifying if a person is who they say they are? We do it with everything else. It's interesting. California is going to have a new system, a new stimulus really, but it's a new system of distributing the next level of stimulus payments only for Californians, right? Because they got a lot of money from the government to do so, the federal government. And when you apply, you have to verify you are who you say you are and that you live in California. So you see there, like, even in that, they recognize you kind of got to verify who you are to some degree. I just think that it's just a no-brainer. This is not a partisan issue, not a white, black issue, Republican, Democrat. No, this is just a common sense objective. Verify you are who you say you are, especially if you have any rules limiting precincts. I'm going to get to that in a second. So we need to eliminate mistakes, error, and fraud, at least fraudulent activity and shady activity, by just identifying a person is who they are. Cool, let's count their vote, and let's make it easier for a person to vote. I know those things are at kind of diametrically opposed in different points of the spectrum, but I believe in making things easier for people to vote and making sure that that person who votes is who they say they are. So just to kind of close, I would also like there to be some sort of uniformity countrywide when it comes to training, databases, processes. I want it to be as standard as possible. All these different states have different procedures. Georgia is different than North Carolina. North Carolina is different than Mississippi and Alabama and Idaho and Iowa. It should be a standardized process, in my opinion, because that will cut down on mistakes and errors. When you have to go to a database and someone could go back and backtrack and look at the history and go through analysis and go through filters, you should be able to do it in real time from any governmental election place in the country and log into a state system. If you have access, particularly if you're a federal person, have access to the various states, what's going on, where's the data, and who have oversight over all of that. There should be nothing to where everything is so segmented and some people are doing things where you fill in a ballot with pencil. Somebody else, you have to sit in front of a computerized screen and you touch the touch screen. Oh, the touch screen's not working. Here's this provisional thing. This is Scantron. Everything should be standardized. That should prevent mistakes and errors. Okay, almost done here. And I'm not really against the individual states having their own things for certain special occurrences like runoffs. Georgia had a big runoff this last year. But the states can handle that in their own way. But for certain things, I think we need to have just standards. In addition, and this is the last thing, I am not a fan of going to one voting precinct. One of the issues this last election, certain places you were able to roll through, basically walk in, vote, and roll out. But if you were assigned to another voting precinct, you had to sit there for 7, 8, 9 hours. That is bogus to me. I believe you should be able to go to any voting precinct. In the past, it was hard. When I first got here to Mississippi, they had a book. They opened it. They said, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat. And they looked on this checklist that they had, paper checklist in their notebook, and checked your name off. They highlighted it and then checked the box next to it. Okay, that person has voted. And I understand that's not going to be everywhere. in real time because it's in paper. But in today's times, in the 21st century, we should be able to have real-time connection to every single voting precinct and polling place. Okay, Jamar Dawson walked in. He voted for Republican, an independent, a Democrat, and a write-in, right, for these particular positions. All right, cool. Boom. Jamar submitted his vote. He is locked out from everywhere else, and that is tabulated everywhere. I think that we could eliminate a lot of headache if people are able to go to whatever precinct they want to in a state and have everybody's on a harmonious, currently up-to-date voter log. That will really help out with databases. It will help with timing. It will reduce the stupid, hey, you don't vote here. You just got in line for 7 hours, but you're not supposed to vote here. You got to go across town, and you're going to be in line for another 3 hours. It's going to eliminate a lot of that kind of crap. So these are some things that I just felt like needed to be added to this particular law. There's some stuff that we talked about I think is either crap or needs to be maybe talked about being taken out of it. I mean, it's too late before the actual law is signed, but I could see people going really hard at the Georgia state legislature to get some of these things changed. Now, one thing you got to know, and we're going to wrap up in a second, one thing you got to know is that these really long bills that are like 100 pages, 300, 500 pages long, legislatures put in there on both sides, they're guilty of it. They put stuff in there that is pork, right? That's stuff that they want, their ulterior motives, and they bury it down within walls and walls of text and hope that nobody finds it. We did some exploratory stuff today where there's some interesting thing in this particular law that really shouldn't be in there. It should have been a separate law. But just be careful. These politicians, Republican, Democrats, and other, they're tricky. They're going to include stuff for their own reasons in these laws, and it's up to us to take a look and figure out what's going on and really kind of take a stand against the fraudulent behavior from politicians and say, look, we don't want this. That's where you got to call your politicians. That's why we have shows like this. You got to tell them, hey, we want this and this and this bill. We want you to strike this down, add this amendment, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what I want to talk about for today as it relates to the Georgia voting law, as it relates to voting around the country, and my thoughts on how we can make things even better. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Now, before we go, we always do a special shout out. And today, I wanted to shout out my good friends at the People's Kingdom. Now, you might have seen this stylish shirt that I'm wearing, F the Devil. You've probably seen some of these on Facebook, pictures and stuff like that. You might have seen some folks that are wearing stuff that says, don't be a Pharisee, or some other really cool slogans. That is by the good folks at the People's Kingdom. Check them out at tpkapparel.com. They are quick in their shipping. Okay, they get your order processed, and they ship it out exceptionally quick. They are doing everything in-house. They're eliminating middlemen, right? And so they're doing this at high quality. They have high quality printing presses. This is made in the United States as far as the actual putting of the graphics onto the shirts. And this is sent out with care. Everything is custom made individually with care. This isn't made somewhere overseas where they're just kind of stamping this. No, they're doing each one of these with high levels of quality. And so you got really cool things on here. You got the new comic collection here. You got Holy Jedi. You got If Love is a Drug, God is Dope. And I got a treat for y'all. The guy who actually founded this company is going to be a guest on our show. We haven't done any guests yet. We got our first guest coming next week. We got Ken Newberger coming on. He's going to talk about some very interesting and controversial stuff. We're going to talk about the Mississippi Medical Marijuana Association and just the medical marijuana industry in Mississippi and how that's kind of really rocked the politicians here and the people. It's been really an incredible ride for those folks, and it's been fun watching the debates back and forth. So we got Ken Newberger coming on next week to talk about that. But we got the one of the founders of the People's Kingdom coming on hopefully in a few weeks to talk about his company, how some of his designs were stolen by other people before, especially this phrase right here. If you check this out and you see God is dope, man, I feel like I've seen that somewhere. Well, it's because you have. And that group, let's just say the group who has those things that say God is dope printed on their shirts, let's just say that idea wasn't original. I'll let my buddy talk about that when he comes on. But make sure to check these guys out. They got hoodies, they got t-shirts, they got the Don't Be a Pharisee shirt, they got the F the Devil shirts, and they even got masks. I think that's pretty dope. I need to get one of those. So I will be ordering one of those tonight as soon as the show ends. So give these guys some business. Good godly guys, good husbands, good dads, and they are really making waves in the apparel industry. And we'll be having one of the founders on in the next couple of weeks. So that's all I got for y'all today. I hope that you guys enjoyed the show, and stay tuned. Next Sunday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you guys have a blessed week. Take it easy. Stay safe. You got any comments, leave them in the comment section, even if it's not live, and we'll be able to interact. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.